Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Let's begin the show with the move to delay the Workers' Housing Act. Now, yesterday, Human Resource Minister Dato' M. Saravanan said that the government will delay enforcing the amendment to the Workers' Housing Act, which is a law that would have required employers to improve housing for their workers. Now, this amendment to the Workers' Housing Act would have meant that employers would need to comply with health and safety housing standards that were set by the International Labour Organization. Now, enforcement of this act was scheduled for this Monday, June the 1st. However, now the government says that it will delay enforcement for 3 months to give companies more time to prepare. In response to this news, the Malaysian Trades Union Congress, or MTUC, has come out quite vehemently to object the delay. They say that employers have had ample time to comply even before the pandemic because these amendments were approved back in September of last year. Sharad, what do you make of all this? I mean, this is quite interesting because you've got on one hand employers saying, well, this is just the wrong time to be implementing this. And on the other hand, MTUC saying this is precisely the right time given everything we know about the living conditions of particularly foreign workers.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because the COVID-19 crisis has become an easy excuse to not do things in some bizarre way. And Melissa, I do think that what often happens in the debate about it is the question of the cost, right? The cost of implementing it, rather than looking at the benefits. So I think the benefits haven't been communicated well enough. We now know, of course, because of the pandemic, that poor living conditions provide opportunities for increased infections and the spread of the contagion, right? But there are other benefits from improving workers' standards. And I think that is something that's really never in the conversation when it comes to trade unions and employers. And employers in particular, I think, are guilty of this.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying, and I understand that employers have had time to comply with this amendment. But given everything that we know of how businesses have been impacted by the MCO, and we've spoken a lot about unemployment, about business closures, how many businesses had 0 to maybe 5% revenue during the MCO period, how are they now supposed to sustain even a further cost and ensure that they have operations? So I really do wonder whether, again, businesses will be able to comply with this and what it would mean for businesses who aren't able to. The other question we want to, I guess, pose tonight for you to consider is the role of the government in this. So, yes, we know what the trades, MTUC, for instance, the unions want versus, say, what the employers are asking for. But what can the government do to help, say, have businesses, ease businesses into investing into the long-term benefits of providing housing for their workers?
But Melissa, because when we talk about government, the government is not some sort of, separate entity from what you and I pay in terms of taxes and what resources the state have that could be applied to other things. So the aim, of course, it'd be interesting to see, not just in terms of legislation that, enables employers or incentivize employers to kind of move in that direction, but also I think we need to kind of be very careful about always reaching for government to subsidize private enterprises. I mean, their profits are not going to flow back into government, not at least directly, right? So again, we have this balancing act to have, but if everybody's clear about what the benefits are in raising living conditions, in raising wages, then perhaps we have a start of a conversation that's productive and a win-win for all.
All right, well, let's move on to other news. Former Youth and Sports Minister Syed Abdul Rahman has urged for university tuition fees to be reduced, as most classes have stopped during the MCO period, and that university infrastructure is also not being used at this point in time. Now, this, of course, comes amidst the Higher Education Ministry's announcement that university classes will be done online until the end of the year. I think it's particularly interesting to see how the pandemic is set to change the higher education landscape locally. And you talked a little bit earlier about us always focusing on the cost. I think this is a prime example of us focusing on fees or the cost of university education. but perhaps it's also an opportunity to reassess what that quality of that degree truly represents, right?
Yeah, Melissa, I do wonder though that for us of us who went to university and did the humanities, all the social sciences, going online seems infinitely possible, right? Because you're kind of dealing with reading and such. But what about those courses that are laboratory based? What about courses where you have
lab work
and I mean laboratory based, but also that requires sort of practical application, right, in engineering and so on and so forth. So I do wonder about going online and whether this is applicable to all courses. But nevertheless, right, when you go online, are you getting less of an education? Is that why the former youth and sports minister thinks that you can now ask for a discount? I mean, what exactly is in the logic of this suggestion when it comes to lessening because of the online character of education?
I think we don't really know what goes into the tuition, right? So is it about infrastructure? Is it about using facilities on campus? Or is it about the quality of the curriculum that is taught, the quality of the faculty who provides more than just I guess classroom teaching, but also guidance and the analysis that comes with the critical thinking that comes with a tertiary education. But I guess perhaps that's not at the forefront of students who are perhaps also facing a tough time during this pandemic, whose parents may also be struggling to make ends meet at the end of the day.
Yeah, again, the question of the higher education sector, and the reform that's necessary,
yeah.
I think often too easily gets, kind of corralled into more populist kind of appeals. So you appeal to younger people by saying, oh, we're going to reduce your fees. I've yet to hear politicians really make the argument for quality education, which
right.
might, in fact, mean fewer people go to university.
Maybe or fewer universities in operation.
Yeah, we certainly have a very bloated higher education system.
20 public higher education institutions in Malaysia, 447 privately owned ones.
Yeah, and so the question is, what kind of quality of education are they providing? And, when it comes to, this impending recession, who's going to be able to really kind of benefit from it because they can parlay really good skills, or whether communicative or analytical. And that's very unclear to me.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. After this, we'll consider the question of who pays for environmental protection. Stay tuned to consider this. Watching Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, with me, Sharad Kutun. Kedah Menteri Besar Muhammad Sanusi Muhammad Noor was recently quoted as saying that the past Pakatan Harapan government had left his administration with claims amounting to 1.5 billion ringgit from 40 logging companies which were given rights to log in the Ulu Muda Forest Reserve area. Or, according to Muhammad Sanusi, in lieu of payments, the logging companies would have to be given replacement forest areas to log in. Now, the forest reserves of Ulu Muda and its surrounding area, known as the Greater Ulu Muda Forest, are an important catchment area, water catchment area. Now, the forest serves the water needs of over 4 million people in Perlis, Kedah and Penang. Now, how do we think through the question of who pays for environmental protection? Joining us on the line now to discuss this, we have Meenakshi Raman, President of Friends of the Earth Malaysia. Meena, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, there seems to be competing claims being made over the necessity of resuming logging in Kedah. Meena, what do you understand to be the crux of the issue?
Well, I think what obviously is happening is the issue about the loggers, the concession holders who were given licenses before the previous government actually took the decision to withdraw or not allow or halt temporarily these concessions from going ahead in the Ulu Muda Forest Reserve. I think there was a huge realization, at least in the past, that we have to start looking at water catchment forests, biodiversity protection, we have to address climate change. And so all these concerns are very important, particularly because these water catchment forests serve the rice bowl of Kedah as well, the important Muda agricultural project there, which is the rice bowl of this country. So I think there was a realization that we can't go on depending on logging concessions for revenues. And so there was an assessment about the fact that the Ulu Muda forest reserves are important, they have to be gazetted and protected, and so that's what happened. And I think the consequence of that, of course, is the implication for the concession holders who were given contracts either by the the past government or the BN government before that. So I think that's what we are dealing with. And so the issue has come up now with the new government, new Menteri Besar there, who now says that we will have to compensate these loggers either through replacement forests or we will have to give them some kind of money. So this is the controversy, and we are right in the middle of it.
Meena, what do you think? I mean, is the position that the current Menteri Besar of Kedah takes that by, in fact, stopping these concessions, withdrawing them, that the state is liable for these claims? I mean, is that, on the face of it, really, is that the truth? I mean, is that exposure to legal claims, in fact, correct?
Well, from what we have read about what the previous Menteri Besar has said, what he has been saying is that there were actually discussions that were held, that has been held with the concession holders. And this is the first time we are hearing about this $1.5 billion claim. I don't think any of these claims have come to court yet. So they're just basically assertions by the logging companies that they have rights. They've yet to go to court as far as I understand. And what exactly is the number? Is it 1 billion? Is it 1.5 billion? Is it $40,000 per hectare? All this is actually claims that have to be validated and verified. So we don't know as a fact. But I think the issue really is a concern by the present government about likely legal suits that may happen in court.
Okay. Meena, whose duty is it to ensure that water catchment areas are protected? Whose legal duty is it?
Well, the legal duty, of course, is the state. I think we are dealing with a huge problem here in terms of balancing commercial and economic interests with the interests of water catchments and biodiversity protection and addressing climate change concerns. I mean, it's the issue about environment versus commercial activities. I think the world has recognized. I think these licenses were issued at a time when the value of the forest were not appreciated enough. In fact, Malaysia is a party to the Convention on Biological Diversity. It's a party to the Paris Agreement. Now, these international agreements have an obligation that the states, but I mean the country, with the help of the states, the federal government, with the help of the states, has to implement, which actually means that they have to protect the water resources, because otherwise we will be facing a massive water crisis. In fact, before the COVID broke out, we already had droughts in Kedah. There were calls by the farmers to say, look, we're not able to plant rice anymore. And in fact, even in Penang, there was a long drought and we had a water crisis, which still is continuing today. So it's the obligation of the government to actually protect water catchment forests. It's so vital.
Right. But, Meena, the question is, at the end of the day, because we're a federal system, right, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that in the past, the federal government had promised Kedah that it would compensate Kedah if it protected that water catchment area, but actually then failed to deliver on its promise, and Kedah resumed, selective exploitation of the Ulu Muda region. What do you understand about this, and also the question of the shared burden that Penang and Perlis might take on in order to helping Kedah achieve this particular goal?
I think there have been, over the years, there's been a lot of discussions, but of course there's been change of governments off and on in Kedah, as you know. And and the federal government as well. I think one of the last government actually apparently was in the midst of recognizing the fact that there should be more resources coming to Kedah. I think there is a legitimate claim by the states which have rich forests to say that you can't just expect us to rely on the normal grants that come from the federal government, that we do need to compensate for the larger public good actually. So there is a legitimate reason for them in asking for compensation. And I think that this is where the international funds are important. We have the Global Environment Facility, we have the Green Climate Fund, we have the Adaptation Fund. Now all these funds were created under the Convention on Biological Diversity and under the Convention on Climate Change.
Okay.
So they were meant to address
sorry
the
to interrupt
concerns
you.
of countries.
I know you've made that argument, you've made that proposal. You've said before that Malaysia should be looking to secure the international funds available for forest protection and conservation. But Meena, access to these funds come with certain requirements, come with certain commitments. Is Malaysia well positioned for that?
Of course it is. I think, we've got a lot of experience with the Green Climate Fund, for instance. We can access these funds. What we need to do is to go through accredited entities. They're not insurmountable, but they definitely are resources which are available. I think what we have not done is explore these options effectively as yet, from what I understand. I think there's an opportunity here, and we must tap. I know that Vietnam has tapped into such resources, the Philippines, the Indonesians, they've all gone to these funding agencies for these resources, and I think the time has come for us to really expedite this.
Meena, a quick answer for you from you. You out there in Penang, do you think the people of Penang should also be contributing to saving the forests of Kedah?
Certainly, I do think that we can no longer have a free ride. I think that the water rates can be raised, especially for the high-end users. I do think that we have an obligation to protect the water catchment forests. These are vital to us. So I don't see consumers have to change their attitude, especially the high-end user. We do need to recognize that we need to pay for some of these services. We cannot get a free ride.
Meena, thank you so much for speaking with us this evening. It's been a pleasure. Now, stay tuned. We're going to continue this conversation in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. Thank you so much for staying with us on Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, with me, Sharad Kutan. Now let's continue our conversation on the protection of the forest reserves of Ulu Muda and its surrounding area. It's home to a huge diversity of species and is the primary source of water for more than 4 million people in the states of Perlis, Kedah and Penang. Now Surin Sook Suwon is a member of the World Commission on Protected Areas under the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Surin, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now, at the centre of the recent controversy, Surin, is logging as a form of revenue generation for the state of Kedah. Is logging necessarily a destructive activity? Is there a way we can look at this in a more positive light?
Well, logging has been a traditional source of revenue for state government. And in more developed states like Selangor, they've been able to phase out logging because they've got other sources of revenue. But with Kedah, it's been very difficult to stop logging because it still forms a major part of the state's revenue. So I think that's the key question here. How, if there is no logging in Kedah, then where else can the state government get the resources it needs to keep the state running?
So as part of the, in lieu of payments for the logging concession companies, the Kedah Menteri Besar has assured that the replacement concessions would be production forests as defined by law. I'm wondering whether that would make a difference, Surin, whether perhaps that could be logging that is seen less destructive to the environment.
Well, the key issue is that we have the Ulumda forest, which is the largest chunk of forest in the state. And it also happens to be the catchment area for the three dams that are in that area, supplying water to Kedah, Penang, and Perlis as well. There's not that much forest outside of Ulumda. So there's some forest in the southern part of Kedah, in the Ulu Sedim area. There's another forest reserve called Teloi, which is of substantial size, but mostly log as well. And then the rest of the forestry areas in Kedah are in the mangrove areas at Gunung Jerai and on Langkawi Island. So if you're not logging Ulumuda, then actually there's not much else that can be logged.
What kind of flags were raised for you, Surin, when you heard this news? What did you think was actually going to happen?
Well, many of us have been working on the Ulumuda issue for many years now, close to 20 years. So we've seen the ups and downs. So every time a new state government comes into place, we kind of prepare ourselves that, okay, here we go again. We've got to do the awareness and engage with the state government again. So I think this is not very much different from previous cases where we have had to, again, tell people what is Ulumuda, why it's important, and why we should look for other options instead of logging.
So, this goes to the heart of the matter. It seems that with environmental issues, destruction can happen overnight. But, putting in place a policy infrastructure to protect something and see it be productive actually is an issue of a generation or so. I mean, what happens when environmental policies need a longer time frame than, the electoral cycle, or in the case of Kedah, something even less than an electoral cycle?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, the solutions take a lot of time to develop. And if you have very quick changes in government, then it doesn't provide the stability for which to explore these other options. And, usually the people have tracked the relationship between elections and logging, and there seems to be a trend whereby, soon after the elections, you will see that there's logging happening because, the political supporters need to get the contracts, the licenses to recoup their whatever investment that they put into the election process. So that's the cycle. So in that kind of situation, I think the federal government has to step in to kind of help the state government out, and also, the larger community, civil society, the private sector also need to do their part.
Okay. I want to touch on that a little bit, Surin, about the federal government's role in this, because I'm wondering whether environmental issues can be best managed at a state level, because, do ecosystems even follow state boundaries? Should this be a federal level concern?
Well, it goes back to our Constitution. So our Constitution says that land and forestry matters are under the state government. So unless change the Constitution, that situation prevails. So different states would have different capacities in terms of their, how well they're managing the forest.
So what would you recommend? What would you propose, Surin? Based on the fact that we have to follow the Constitution, what would you then propose the federal government, what role do you propose the federal government play in this?
Yeah. So, to be fair, the federal government has actually been trying to do something. So in the previous government, for example, they introduced something called the ecological fiscal transfer, whereby grants from the federal government to the state government are based on the commitment that the state has made in order to protect its natural resources. So in 2019, when they introduced the EFC, a substantial amount of the fund actually went to Kedah because Kedah made the commitment that they would stop logging in Ulumuda. So the federal government has done something, but I think the quantum of it is still not enough because I think the transfers is in the scale of millions, whereby you probably need tens of millions or hundreds of millions to really make a difference.
Surin, we had Meenakshi Raman on the line earlier, and we talked about international funds. I mean, do you think that states could go directly to international funds in order to bolster their own environmental programs to the extent that they see a reason or commitment to do that?
Yeah, I think that there are some possibilities. So that the funds may not come directly into the state treasury. Usually, international funds are to be negotiated between the federal government on our behalf and whichever government that is making the donation, or maybe it's coming from the World Bank or whatever it is, right? But when it comes to grants direct to the state government, usually it would be in the form of projects. For example, I mean, there is funding that has been negotiated between the Kedah state government and the UNDP, the National Development Program, which is not going directly into the state treasury, but the fund is supposed to be used for doing a study on the legal framework for protecting forests in the state, right? So you can get that kind of support, but you're not going to get money that will go straight into trade treasury and that to be used for development or paying salaries and all that kind of stuff. You don't really expect to see that. Yeah.
Well, Surin, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. We really appreciate your time as well as you sharing your insights. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan signing off for this evening.
Thank you so much for watching and good night.